The 24th of July, 1944. West of Saint-Lô. Bocage lanes hold damp air like a lung that will not exhale. Low cloud presses the hedgerows flat. In a concrete room that smells of wet lime and hot transformer oil, General Lieutenant Fritz Bayerlein steadies a palm on the plotting table and listens for the metronome. He trusts range drum, clicks relay chatter, clipped to call signs, pencil ticking on grid squares. Cable discipline is good, lines are clean. The orchard to the north gives the forward observer a narrow slit of sight between two ash trunks. The field is quiet, no cattle to raise dust, no careless reflector flash to betray a post. He notes spacing on the last hostile impacts reported overnight and treats them as a test pattern, not a threat. Seconds are counted, not feared. The cadence of work holds him distance charge, fuse correction, until the bunker gives a shallow cough of dust from the embrasure seam and grit trembles into his hand. The first heavy arrival does not show itself. It announces itself through the wall. A flat crack, then a rolling whump, then another closer, the interval tightening like a belt around the trench line. He marks the spacing. 5, 4, 3. The room breathes with the shock lamps humming as if the current itself is afraid. Hold the line. Never trade position for time. The oath sits behind his teeth as another salvo walks in from somewhere he cannot see and cannot answer. A cable hisses, bites and dies. A runner stumbles in chalked white head ducked from a roof that keeps shedding. Precision drills do not calm the hand this time. They crowd it. The perfect position roof poured to speck fields of fire. Recorded camouflage exact begins to feel like a seal instead of a shield. On the net, a new voice cuts through with the ugly clarity of utility, fast and unadorned, as if spoken with a wrench in the mouth. Battery set corrections, received fire for effect in 2, shift on splash, lift by map, no poetry only. Movement. The words carry a verdict more than an order, and they come from the side that measures minutes, the way others measure meters. The blast reaches him, a moment later turning air to gravel. He thinks in intervals and understands too late that the clock is not his to keep. Perfection needs time. We will not give them any. The blast cycle settles into a rhythm that mocks the map. Impacts arrive with the impersonality of a factory clock, each concussion shaving a new seam of dust from the roof. Range tables lie open. Protractors splay like ribs. A grease pencil leaves a black comet on the acetate overlay as the plotting hand begins to shake in time with the air. The room smells of lime and electricity. Voices ride the net in clipped fragments that sound practiced until a wire goes dead mid-syllable and the sentence must be finished by a runner who arrives with his ears ringing and his eyes full of grit. A staff captain, proud of tolerances and doctrine, gives the first contemptuous line that everyone in the room has heard in some form. They make tractors with guns. Crude, fast, ugly. There is a dry chorus of agreement, the last reflex of a culture trained to measure worth by finish and fit. On the table, a cutaway sketch of a bunker shows rebar spaced like music-poured roof, thick enough to shrug off field pieces. Of normal caliber embrasures, angled against ricochet shooting tables prepared with loving exactitude. The perfect geometry that was supposed to turn men into calculus. The captain's mouth continues to move as another arrival turns it to mime. The lamps hum back to life a half-beat later. In the interval between salvos, the logic that held this army together reveals its fragility. Precision in this doctrine is not an affectation. It is a moral premise. A gun that is lapped, a bearing that is hand-fitted, a breech that closes with the clean kiss of polished steel. These are not mere objects. They are a pledge that the world can be made obedient if one tends it properly. The men on this side have spent years learning how to make a single shell land, like a surgeon's instrument. They have memorized the noise of a fuse as intimately as a musician knows backstage whispers before a concert. The opposite premise enters through the wall. A battery commander somewhere outside the hedgerows speaks in a language that does not bother with the ceremony of excellence. He wants a grid, a correction, a time on target. He promises neither elegance nor exactness beyond what the solution requires to collapse the problem. His piece is not a violin, it is a hammer. It does not need to be beautiful to break stone. The hammer brings friends. The room learns the names by their rhythm rather than by their markings. Labor and material sit invisibly beside every blast. On this side of the line, the supply chain is a watch made of watches, case-hardened parts mated to case-hardened attitudes, a bureaucracy of signatures ensuring that a machine emerges with a pedigree. Each toleranced component is a sermon about seriousness. Each increment of inspection is an oath. The guns that the captains call crude are welded and bolted with a different promise. They are not born of the guild. They come off lines where speed is a form of mercy, where replacement is a sacrament. The other side does not waste time polishing what will be dragged through hedgerow, mud jerked into position by a prime mover that groans like a farm animal and fired until the tube is tired enough to be traded for another. Breath grows short between impacts. A corporal works the field phone crank so hard his knuckles bleach. Someone tries to hold a pencil line steady while the bunker's ceiling flexes just enough to be noticed. The crosshairs in a periscope swim as if the sea had come inland. Precision rituals continue because the body must do something, but the cadence has changed. A gun layer in the attached battery, a man with forearms like turned wood, and a pride that stains his nails as deeply as oil misses a beat in a laying drill he could perform while half asleep. He blinks hard, clears his throat, lies about dust, his cheeks twitch on the next arrival. It is a small betrayal, and he hates it, and it is recorded nowhere but in the way his left hand refuses the next fine correction. The contempt line returns in a different uniform. Crude pieces, crude crews, crude doctrine, yet crude is the wrong word for what beats the room. The better word is available. Available guns, available shells, available motive power to drag them wherever a map whispers it would hurt. Available roads cleared of wrecks by men whose job is movement, not maintenance of pride. Available spare tubes stacked like fence posts. Available crews trained to the discipline of enough instead of the catechism of perfect. The men here can taste the difference each time the roof shivers. The ledger is made of things the senses can count. In the corridor, a runner braces his shoulder to a wall at the precise moment a new salvo arrives and feels the lime bite into cloth and skin, a bite that was not there an hour ago. In the generator alcove, a technician smells hot varnish beginning to turn and checks the ammeter with a hand that prefers to be elsewhere. In the gun pit outside the layer's ear counts seconds between arrivals and finds them thinning from a civilized interval to a crude arithmetic that cares only for outcome. The blast pattern begins to walk the trench line with the unsentimental patience of a man with a shopping list. Complexity becomes a form of immobility. A vehicle that would rather be repaired than replaced is a philosophy on wheels. A piece that wants a craftsman's touch at every turn of a wrench is an argument about the worth of skill in a world that is shedding minutes. The other side bets that iron can be moved faster than pride can be protected. A mechanic there will throw a part down and bolt on a new one, rather than coax a worn surface into compliance. A chief there will sign off on satisfactory and send the column forward. A quartermaster there will bleed a depot to feed a timetable, not a pedigree. The doctrine lives or dies by whether the next position receives fire on time. An older officer who has worn a monocle long enough to have a pale ring where the glass once sat offers the most honest line he has spoken in months. They do not outshoot us. They outlast us. It is not contrition. It is a measurement. He says it while lifting a cracked mapboard and watching a trickle of dust run like an hourglass into the seam of the table. In that thin stream is the statistic that matters most in this room. It falls without passion, without variance, and without apology. Outside, a prime mover coughs in the orchard, as if the enemy had reached through the hedgerow and planted it there. In truth, the machine is far away, but the ear cannot accept distance when the wall speaks so intimately. The men who serve these long guns think in minutes, how many to emplace, how many to range, how many to lift and shift, how many to swap a tube, when where steel's precision beyond the doctrine of enough. Their arithmetic is cold and physical. A pallet is a solved problem. A bridge is a solved problem. A hedgerow is a solved problem. The bunker is a solved problem. Solutions are not essays. They are timetables. The counter-battery story, taught with the confidence of parade, begins to fail under this tempo. The antennas here seek a clean tone through which to send coordinates and receive salvation. The tone arrives, muddied by the air itself. Engineers can calculate locating curves against muzzle flashes and sound. The paper knows its math, the crews know their drills. But the enemy's pieces are already lifting to new ground by the time the formula is ready. A doctrine that assumes the enemy will hold still long enough to be punished becomes a prayer for manners in a fight where none are observed. Hands learn what the mind resists. A sergeant whose palms have always been steady enough to fill a fountain pen on a moving lorry now smears graphite across the acetate because the line refuses to lie straight through the next shock. A lieutenant who could strip and clean a field telephone blind now finds the cloth of the handset slipping under sweat and dust. None of this is dramatized in their voices. The betrayal is not in what they say. It is in what their bodies do, despite them. A young artillery officer, his boots still black with an academy's confidence, whispers another version of the contempt and turns it into an accusation against his own language. If their pieces are so crude, why do they move like water? No one answers him. The room does not have the air for philosophy. The bunker's design still gleams on the paper like a moral argument. Thick roof, correct angles, recorded arcs, yet the perfect position has become a time trap. Every minute it holds is a minute it pays for in cable, in lungs, in nervous systems, shaking themselves out of their frames. The next runner arrives with a message that contains no brave words at all, and it is the most brutal lesson this morning will teach. The enemy's battery has shifted. The intervals have changed. The impacts now favour the communications trench. The handwriting staggers across the strip but remains legible. The body hates the truth it writes, but the message arrives intact. There is a way to pretend none of this is moral, only mechanical. The men here could say that the other side happens to have more trucks, more fuel, more tubes, more shells, more everything that measures. They would not be wrong. But the divorce underway in this room is not merely between tactics that work and tactics that do not. It is a separation between a faith that worships the completeness of a single instrument and a faith that worships the speed with which many instruments can be brought to bear and thrown away. One makes a masterpiece and asks the world to respect it. The other makes a schedule and asks the world to make room. When the lamps flicker again, the plotting hand steadies for a last, deliberate line that is not quite straight. The breath is counted not to calm the heart, but to borrow enough seconds to speak the only conclusion the body will accept. Perfection promised rescue through control. The clock is the traitor. The clock belongs to someone else. The betrayal is not what the enemy fires, it is how quickly they choose to fire it again. They move on a narrow clock of their own making. A local counter is drawn with the same care a draftsman brings to a bridge. 2 companies of panzer grenadiers with attached engineers thread the sunken lane panthers, hugging the berm so close their skirts comb hedgerow roots. The forward observer's orchard is marked as the throat of the problem. Cut it, and the voice that walks fire along the line should go silent. Timing is layered smoke pots for the first 50 metres machine gun teams, to stitch the field edges engineers with Bangalore sections, to pry open the next fence, a reserve squad to leapfrog and hold the cut. The first minute belongs to angles. The second minute belongs to nerve. For once, the drill performs like the book promised. A hatch lifts to a 2-finger width, a hand flashes the lead. Panther eases its nose out just enough to let the cokes find the farmhouse gable, where glass once glinted a quick burp, then back. Grenadiers surge on the beat boots, scraping chalk packs tight to keep from snagging wire bodies, turning sideways through green walls as if entering a crowded room. A runner tumbles into the orchard and finds the ladder he was promised. He climbs into apple leaves and windfall smell, and sees what he came to see: a tripod with a phone, a man with headphones, a mapboard with its corners sandbagged against the day's breath. The runner pulls the cable like a root and yanks the plug as if truth were a weed that could be killed by hand. He wants the cord in his fist like a trophy. Net traffic thins. The bunker breathes. Even the lamps seem to brighten. A captain allows himself one dry sentence that tastes like relief: we cut the tongue. The panther knows his father and drops a high explosive into the farmhouse shell to make it honest. The wall comes apart as if it had always been waiting. The platoon on the right clears a field notch and comes up on the hedge like a wave. A sapper in the centre has a fuse already lit his face. a statue of routine the Bangalore sliding into a seam like a key into an old lock. The first counterstroke arrives from nowhere in particular, a rumble that is not a tank's crankcase, but a floor-deep thing, a pressure that does not announce itself as a single impact, but as a family. The air does not crack. It thickens. The orchard coughs leaves, then clumps of earth. The runner's hand slips off the ladder when the rung jumps in his palm. He is not thrown. He is repositioned by physics. He rolls under the ladder belly first, and hugs the trunk, as another arrival unthreads fruit from twigs like beads from a string. His ears fill with the sound of a cloth being snapped hard. The phone he meant to pocket is now a rattle in a bag that was not there before. Reports are short because they have to be. The orchards are under walking fire. Unknown pieces. Interval tightening. The bunker is too far back to see any muzzle flash. The math will have to work by ear. The first assumption that silencing one voice would unwrite the sentence dies as a new sentence arrives equally grammatical, equally fluent, spoken by a different mouth. The correction is quick and unsentimental. Lift 200, write 1 grid, repeat, splash in 5. The accents are different, but the message is the same. The clock belongs to them. On the lane, discipline tries to hold shape. Grenadiers flatten into the side of the bank heels, biting at chalk heads tucked so that the blast blows hair instead of brains. The Panther reverses on a straight track with a driver whose hands were trained to steer by feel, not sight. He finds the cut by memory and smell. The Bangalore team takes the hit as a lesson, not a punishment. Fuse-lit section, shoved bodies folded around the knowledge of timing that cannot be taught. The explosion kicks out a mouth in the hedge, a ragged oval they pretend is a doorway. The first minutes almost work. That phrase becomes the signature of defeat today. The local geometry is correct. The enemy's first battery is disrupted. The men on this side can still hear themselves think between salvos. Then the second battery arrives without a fanfare, just a change in the interval and a new direction to the dust. The third adds weight rather than music. The pattern is not art, it is construction. Fire is poured as if to set a post in the earth, and the position is the hole that needs filling. A gun layer in the attached battery starts his drill with a confidence that belongs to sleep. He has laid more pieces than he has eaten breakfasts. Elevation, traverse level, check fine correction, whisper to the breech, hand on the wheel like a man greeting a friend. The first miss is small, a half-degree held against a jolt that takes it anyway. He corrects and tells himself he did not. The second is larger, his left hand refuses the fine turn, because it wants to brace for the next breath of the wall. He drags it back to the instrument like a parent guiding a child to table manners while the house shakes. The orchard becomes a painter's nightmare. Leaves lift in sheets, settle as confetti lift again, before they can decide to be ground. The runner who held the cable like a trophy now holds his own helmet against a spray of grit that bites the lip and tastes metallic. He wants to believe the cable was the root. It was a leaf. The voice moves to another tree line he cannot see. He watches the way the dirt jumps along the rows. It is not random. It walks like a man who knows the path from hearth to water. Redeployment minutes, the measure no one wanted to respect, reveal themselves as law. A battery that can lift and shift in 10 steals the value of a calculation that needs 12. A tube that can be swapped in 15 makes mockery of a counter-battery solution that will be correct in 20. A prime mover that can drag steel through hedgerows and be back under the next piece before the enemy's nerves recover turns skill into an artifact. The men here can taste each minute lost as clearly as cordite. It is in the way the next impact arrives before the hand can finish the line on the acetate. It is in the way a man times his breath to the blasts and still loses the count. Signals begin to sound like a shop floor. Messages are half words and numbers, the rest implied by tempo and repetition. The best operators on the net do not ask for elegance. They ask for confirmation and the promise that someone else is moving before the last correction lands. In the bunker, the plotting table acquires a small slope of dust that wants to be a dune. The grease pencil sinks and leaves a heavy mark like a plough in wet ground. The monocle ring on the older officer's temple pales further as sweat erases colour. He pinches the socket without thinking and draws a line that shivers at the end. The local counter keeps trying to matter. A squad reaches the farmhouse ruin and finds nothing in it that will bleed today. The man with the ladder has traded his height for a hole and prays for a slow interval that never comes. The panthers keep their glaces to the likely arcs, taking shallow angles that read as modesty rather than fear, edging their noses just far enough to threaten. Gunnery stays clean, doctrine is observed. The reports are crisp, the posture correct, the strides measured. The next salvo removes any chance of pretending the method is not being graded by the wrong teacher. Vent panels cough dust in little puffs that look domestic, as if someone inside had beaten a rug. The dust is a census, every cough is a name taken. A corporal who has never miscounted a fuse time finds his lips moving against the blast and hears himself say a number that is not the one he meant. He writes what he meant on the pad, not what he said, and hates both of them for existing at once. A lieutenant with the periscope cannot hold the crosshairs steady. They swim as if the channel had flooded the field. He blinks hard, blames his eyes, blames the glass, blames the last arrival for scuffing the seal. He just tightened, blames anything polite enough to accept it. The promise of discipline turns into a sacrificial rite. The men perform every step properly, and the steps lead them to the fact that properly executed steps cannot shorten another man's redeployment minute. Rolling suppression does not care that the hedge was opened with textbook technique. It does not care that the flank was checked, that sectors were assigned, that the arcs were painted on the acetate like an icon. It cares only that steel can be moved and fired again before a different idea can grow a root. A perfect order shouted inside the bunker becomes less valuable than a rough order shouted from a truck bed that is already rolling. In the fields beyond the hedges, new guns speak in a second dialect of the same language. There is no dramatic flourish to their arrival. A brief lull is the only introduction, the kind of almost silence that makes all ears lift like dogs. Then the pattern resumes with a new accent, heavier in the lower register, faster between syllables. The lane becomes a tunnel of timing. Men press their shoulders into earth, each trying to borrow a little ground from the blast to become part of the hedge rather than a figure against it. The engineers still carry their charges. One drops a banger not from fear but because the next concussion disconnects his fingers from intention. He picks it up with hands that refuse to be scolded into obedience and slides it home. Counter-battery guns on this side answer, because honor requires it. Tubes bark with the old pride. Crews work with the old rhythm. The shots leave clean and true, and a few arrivals will certainly bruise a position the enemy just vacated. The math writes itself on paper and fails to catch a moving target made of doctrine plus logistics. A captain speaks a set of numbers into a handset that crackles as if applauding him for precision. He believes the answer, even as he watches the lamp flicker with the proof that the question is misplaced. There is a moment when the body understands what the mind refuses to sign. It happens at small scales. A gunlayer flinches not at the blast but at the quiet between blasts, because the quiet is when his hand must try to be fine and fails. A radio operator draws breath to speak and has to swallow grit first. A driver rests his forehead on the rim of the hatch for a count of 3 before popping it open because he has learned the interval by feel and would rather not meet the blast head-on. None of these gestures are grand. Together, they are a verdict. The orchard yields a last image before the smoke makes images moot. Apples rock in place, stems straining, then fall in a sudden common decision when the next roll of pressure passes. They thud into dirt already soft with their brothers. The runner who took the cable watches his hand tremble over the prize he thought would solve the morning. He closes the fist around the plug because that is what can be closed. He does not put it in his pocket. He holds it the way a man holds a charm that does not work. By the time the counter reaches the far hedge, the field no longer understands that it once belonged to geometry. The ground has been persuaded to answer to time instead. The position can still be held for minutes. The men can still execute every page in the book. The minutes they buy are counted by another man's schedule. What the book does not say is how to make the schedule yours. Discipline remains. It is not abandoned, it is spent. Each drill is performed to the end, each correction is spoken, each check is made, each courage is shown. The return on that investment is a kind of dignity that looks like stubbornness to the sky. The sky does not grade for dignity. The sky grades for whether the next gun has arrived and whether its crew can fire before the breathing in the bunker returns to normal. The answer today is yes. Shock comes back not as a single blow, but as a returning weather. The room registers it before the ear does a soft shiver through the plotting table, a powder of lime loosening from the seam lamps, humming as if the filament had learned to fear. Then the sound arrives in full flat crack-rolling whump floor deep pressure, each arrival closer by a fraction that a hand could measure if the hand were not busy pretending to be steady. Heartbeats climb without permission. 94, 98, 104. Breathing abandons the 4 count he has rehearsed for years and falls into a ragged 2 and 1, 2 and 1, the body smuggling extra air between syllables of orders. The chest tightens not with panic but with the mathematics of oxygen under percussion. Fingers that once loved metal for its obedience now find grit where grip should be. The grease pencil leaves a dark, heavy crescent when the next shock drags it sideways. The crescent looks like a bruise. The first instinct is to wait for the interval to lengthen. It does not. The second is to rebuild the cable ladder, one cut at a time. A runner is already at it, shoulders chalked, white mouth open for breath he cannot keep. He ties a new section with hands that cannot decide which knot they learned first. Before he can report, the seam above him coughs again and powders his scalp. The phone hisses, bites and dies like an animal that has learned its part too well. He has sworn never to trade ground for time. He has spoken it to juniors as if it were a charm against modernity. He has worn it like a medal in rooms where the air smelled of leather and polish rather than oil and lime. The oath is not rhetoric to him. It is a geometry of duty. Hold the line and the line holds you. In this room, under this weather, the oath becomes an instrument that will not tune. The beats do not match. The wall keeps the enemy's time. Outside, the local counter that almost worked is listing. The hedge has a mouth now torn open by Bangalore's, but the mouth spits dust instead of options. The panthers reverse into the cut with caution that reads as modesty rather than fear. Glacis kept toward the wrong horizon, because the right one will not hold still. Grenadiers count the salvos and try to move in the negative space between them. The negative space keeps shrinking. The orchard has learned to shed all at once, apples thudding as one when the next roll of pressure passes. A signal flare that was meant to be a word goes sideways, scrawling a bright insult across a sky already done listening. He studies the acetate through a sheet of falling dust and sees a thing he does not say aloud. The perfect position is a trap if the other man owns the clock. The alternate positions marked last week cautious, prudent, almost cowardly in the way they conceded the need to step cease to be theoretical. They become coordinates with a pulse. He watches his own hand lay a ruler from the current grid to the nearest cut in the hedgerow map. The hand draws clean. The heart spikes to 112. The order he has forbidden himself to speak clears his throat as if it belonged to someone else. Short displacement, 200 meters back. Use the southern lane hedge cuts 3 and 5. Guns mask behind the saddle. Nets on the move. Prime movers up now. He does not say the word retreat. He does not need to. The men hear it anyway, because every syllable smells like it. The radio operator repeats it in a voice that climbs a half-note breath, falling into 2 and 1, 2 and 1, confirm short displacement. South lane 3 and 5, mask and move. The confirmation comes back in fragments because the air eats sentences for food now. A captain in the lane answers with a professional flatness that frees everyone from the sin of drama. Acknowledged, moving, dust heavy, interval closing. A mechanic in the gun park coughs, varnish smell, and says in a tone that belongs on a shop floor that the first mover is hot and the second will be if someone gives it fuel. Someone gives it fuel. He feels the old dignity sliding and hates the feeling more than the dust in his teeth. He knows exactly where this sits in the theology of his trade, the place where prudence wears the mask of cowardice and must be ordered into existence by rank. He gives the order again as if repetition could launder it. Heart at 108. Breath at 2 and 1 with a stolen half between. Movement begins not in a line but in a series of stutters that pretend to be a line whenever the blast grants them a pause. The first panther noses backward commander half up in the hatch glove on the rim, eyes cutting left and right not for beauty but for clearance. Tracks bite, chalk, slur once, catch and roll. Grenadiers peel from the hedge in small, precise bursts, each man choosing a personal hedgerow saint to pray to as he crosses a gap that is nobody's friend. An engineer hugs his charge like a child and waits until his bones ring with the right kind of quiet before he runs. He does not wait long enough. He never will today. Long-range impacts keep their own promenade. They march the trench line with a metronome that obeys no one in this field. The new pattern favours the communications trench, exactly the place that must remain whole if Grace is to get out alive. A salvo lands shallow and rolls dirt like surf over a man sized to take it. Another lands deep and lifts a vent panel in the bunker with a domestic little cough that enrages everyone who hears it. The cough sounds like housekeeping during a murder. He steps into the corridor and feels the building adjust to the weather. The wall against his shoulder is a steadying friend and an indictment. He measures his breath because the body insists on a task, and numbers are a task that look like leadership. 98, 96, 100. He cannot pull the rate down without lying to his lungs. He refuses to lie. He has told other men that courage is a cadence that one can learn to count through fear. Today the count is a record, not a cure. A runner arrives with eyes too bright and says the lane is blocked by a fallen tree that was not fallen an hour ago. He says it fast, and then keeps his mouth open because breath needs a door. The prime mover behind him idles with a patient animal sound heat pooling under its hood like guilt. The mechanic who promised it stands with a fuel can and no hand free to salute. He nods instead, the nod of a man who has learned the value of parts. He chooses the eastern cut instead, and hears himself say it as if dictating a letter. East cut, then the dry ditch. Keep the second mover low. Smoke on the bend. He wonders who taught his voice to stay level while his chest races. Training did. Pride did. A lifetime of pretending the body was a gentleman did. The next arrival erases the end of the sentence anyway, and the operator fills it in, because the operator knows how this music goes. They go. The first gun is on the hook in seconds that feel expensive. Nets trail like dead skins. Men who love to coil things neatly throw rope into a heap because time has outlawed beauty. The mover's driver, a man with shoulders like the idea of work, grinds into the lane and takes the bend shallow to keep the load from fighting him. He counts the blast as if he were counting sheep, an old joke too tired to laugh at. The blast counts him instead. A panther throws its weight across a rut, and the commander's teeth knock together in a rhythm he will remember when he wakes at night 5 winters from now. He raises a hand toward a sign that says nothing any longer. Leaves shake in applause and then fall silent. Smoke pours from a pot with all the elegance of a roadside stew and earns its keep. Through it the column becomes rumour rather than target. He walks once more through the plotting room as if a map could carry a blessing if seen from the right angle. The acetate bears scars that were not there at dawn. The black crescents where the pencil skidded look like fingerprints taken by a rough cop. He smooths the sheet with a palm that returns white. When he lifts it, a faint outline of his hand remains in negative. He is not sentimental about it. He is a man who notes facts. The fact is that the room has begun to record its users like fossils. On the net, a voice from the battery that tried to hold the orchard murmurs coordinates in a tone that makes a confession without asking for absolution. The man states his grid as if he were telling his mother where to find a lost key. He pauses once, not for feeling but to spit dust. The mouth refuses to be a cooperative instrument today. The correction he receives is brisk and accurate, and belongs to the side that has never promised anyone a masterpiece. Movement becomes a moral argument performed in steel. The column snakes through the eastern cut, half hidden by smoke and the bad manners of the ground. Men keep discipline, not because the drill will save them, but because the drill is the last dignified language available. A grenadier's hand shakes when he clips his pack high to clear a gate. The shake stops when the blast returns, as if the earth's anger could steady him more than his will could. A radio's handset slips once in sweat and is caught in a claw that does not intend to fail in public. The shame arrives not as a hot flush, but as a cool accounting. He knows what he has done to his oath. He has traded position for time. He has handed the clock an admission and been told it was already holding it. He will not excuse it as finesse. He will not decorate it as art. He calls it what it is inside the private room behind his eyes, survival purchased at the price of an identity. He does not speak the word. No one would hear it properly here. Heart settles at 96 as the first guns reach the saddle and mask. Breath steadies into something like 3 and 2. He does not congratulate himself for the numbers. They are not victory. They are a measurement of how much the body can be bullied back into service once it has recognized a new master. He watches crews throw camouflage like fishermen throwing nets and finds a mean comfort in the speed. They are learning the other doctrine by necessity, the one that honors replacement over repair, movement over finish, minutes over meters. The impacts do not stop. They adjust. The pattern hunts the new lane the way water finds the low place. The roof coughs, one last little housekeeper's cough, as if to remind the room of its manners. He stands under it long enough to be dusted again. The powder lands on his shoulders with the weight of a sentence completed. He brushes it off because that is something a hand can do. A voice from the far hedge, a private or a saint, says without poetry that the column is clear of the bend. Another voice closer in, made thin by distance and duty, adds that the second mover has the second gun, and the driver will not stop for anything softer than a wall. He answers both with one syllable that costs him nothing and purchases nothing. They take the ditch, they take the cut, they take the saddle. The alternate positions accept them like beds made by a worse host. Nets rise, tubes turn. Bearings are checked with hands that still want to be exact, even when exactness has been redefined as enough. He breathes 2 and 1, 2 and 1, then 3 and 2, because a man must choose a rhythm if he wishes to sound like himself. The shame remains. It will remain tomorrow and in any quiet that follows. It is not a stain that can be washed. It is a ledger entry that will sit under the column labelled identity. He knows with the clarity of a technician reading a dial that his relevance has been graded by a system he did not build and cannot slow. The walls of the bunker knew it before he did. The orchard learned it with the apples. The men have learned it with their hands. He gives the last order of the move without ornament. Mask complete. Prepare to answer. He does not add the sentence that lives in his throat, answer quickly, or do not bother answering at all. The air carries enough verdicts today. The gun park sits in a shallow fold of ground beyond a hedgerow gate that has forgotten how to close. Grass lies pressed flat in wide twin arcs, where heavy wheels turned and returned until the stems learned the shape. The air smells of wet canvas, cold grease, and the sour sweetness of trampled clover. A wind moves low, not enough to lift the corner of a tarp, only enough to make it consider the idea. No one fires here now. The noise has walked elsewhere and left its tools behind. Steel dominates without elegance. Trails splayed like a beetle's legs, spades chewed bright by earth, recoil cylinders streaked where rags were too slow between salvos. The breech is a square board mouth that does not pretend to be anything but a way to make powder vanish into work. The finish is not a finish. It is paint over welds, bolts proud of their holes, corners left honest. Even the stencil on the carriage letters, so plain they could have been brushed by a man paid by the minute, feels like a sermon about priorities. He lays a hand on the cheek of the cradle and takes the temperature of the day from it. The metal is almost ambient now, the last heat blown out by the same breeze that moved powder smoke an hour ago. His palm returns with a film of dust that carries the smell of graphite and oil. He looks for the little prides that his own crews keep alive in miserable weather, a polished lever, a waxed strap, a tool wrapped as if it were jewellery. This park offers nothing of that kind. Straps are straps. Levers scrape. Tools sit in open chests, heads, dinged handles, nicked, ready to be taken up by any hand that can count. A crate of shells rests on skids close enough to feed the piece without ceremony. The markings on the wood are as blunt as the gun caliber lot fuse. A fuse setter lies on its side where someone set it when the timetable told them to stop tending and start throwing. He lifts it and feels the notch wear under his thumb, the imprint of habit in cheap metal. The setter returns to the crate with a small clack that sounds like approval in this quiet. A tractor waits with its engine shut, nose still angled toward a rut it knows well. Mud cakes the treads in a pattern that repeats every few links, a rhythm made of work rather than grace. The hood has a dent where a wrench once slipped. The dent was never fixed, because the tractor was never meant to impress anyone but a clock. Chains hang from a hook, each link nicked by some former day, each nick a counted minute. He touches one and feels the cold bite back a reply as brief as a nod. He crouches by the spade and studies the earth it bit. The cut is clean, then jagged where the ground fought and lost, then clean again where the piece was hove out in a hurry. A man who loves geometry can admire the line and still understand what it says. Emplace fire, lift, shift, repeat. No romance. The ground is a ledger. Entries are time in, time out. Balance carried forward to the next field. Boot steps in the grass behind him. The battery captain who guided them through the quiet clears his throat, once a habit born of dust and duty, not of hesitation. They do not keep them, the captain says, eyes on the tractor, not on the general. They turn them. He means the parts, the tubes, the crews, the positions. He means everything. They turn them, the general repeats as if testing a foreign verb. His hand runs along the trail to the hinge where the locking pin seats. The pin carries scars from hammers that were not picky about which hammer struck first. He remembers the lectures about protecting surfaces, about the dignity of fit, about the way a good gun repays respect with accuracy. He looks at the field where accuracy was replaced by enough, and understands which language the day speaks. A sergeant opens an ammunition box and exposes the blunt brass shoulders of cartridges arranged like organ pipes cut short for speed. He removes one and holds it out, not as an offering but as evidence. The general weighs it, feels the promise of stored minutes inside the shell and bag. He sets it back with care that will never be returned by the system that made it. They place the park by the road, not by the pride, the captain says. Still doctrinal, not bitter. Tow line close, splash line closer. You can see it in the ruts. The ruts are a scripture more legible than the paint. Back and forth, each passage proof that someone valued movement over manners. The general follows them to the lip of the fold and looks along the hedge toward a lane that bulges with crushed nettles. A low wall bears a smudge where a bumper kissed it at speed and did not apologize. A broken branch leans leaves still green, proof that the last shift happened minutes before men like him had hoped to punish the prior one. He returns to the piece and circles, once not hunting for a weakness, but for the story the steel insists on telling. The equilibrators wear thin films where gloves always touch. The handwheel has lost paint in a semicircle that matches the reach of a hurried arm. The sight mount is blunt product of a factory that cut corners on purpose to cut time in transit. None of it is sloppy. All of it is unpitying. The gun is an instrument for making more guns necessary in more places, not an heirloom. Doctrine says, we answer mass with precision, the captain offers as if reporting weather facts. We have been answering minutes with meters. He does not look up from the breech when he replies. We have been answering minutes with reputation. The words hang without heat. They are not an insult to anyone present. They are an inventory. He steps back and pictures the park-filled crews in shirt sleeves. One man's rag held in his teeth while he frees both hands to pin a lock, a driver counting backward to a hitch, by feel a chief looking past his own piece to see if the tow has begun to move 2 guns down, everyone keeping a single clock without a single watch shown. He can almost hear the low voices that belong to work done correctly, left a half-spike seated ready on command lift in 30. The rhythm is not martial in the old sense. It is industrial as a harvest. Can you hold it, he asks, still looking at the carriage as if the steel would answer first. For an hour, the captain says, which is either optimism or honesty. An hour is a definition, the general says, not a plan. He places his palm flat against the breech face until his skin learns its texture. Square, unforgiving, effective, despite indifference. He thinks of the breeches in his own park, polished by men who loved metal as if it could love them back. He does not regret their hands. He regrets the sermon they were given about the world's willingness to be impressed. They built this to be moved by men who do not need to like it, he says. They built it to be moved on time, the captain answers. The exchange is not an argument. It is a joint reading of text. A private from the engineer detachment climbs onto the tractor and checks the fuel gauge without asking permission the way a man checks a stove before lighting a cigarette. He frowns at a hose, slaps it twice as if reprimanding a lazy dog, then nods to himself. The general watches and recognizes a species he has been slow to value, the priest of function whose liturgy is seconds and seals. The wind shifts, and brings the ghost of the morning's work cordite flattened into the grass, oil volatilizing off hot housings, the human salt that always hangs over places where men have labored quickly. The park does not care who breathes it. The park does not keep score. The park cares if the next tow arrives on time. He speaks softly, because volume would feel fraudulent here. We wrote a philosophy that asks the world to wait while we tune the instrument. They wrote a schedule that asks nothing and takes everything. The captain nods once. The side that controls minutes chooses the mistakes it can afford. He looks past the hedge toward fields that are already composing a new map. He can feel the old catechism reaching for him, discipline, geometry, fire control, each a word with a lifetime of earned gravity. He does not throw them away, he edits them. Availability beats perfection because it controls time, he says, as if dictating to a clerk who will never mishear the sentence. Control time, and you make our positions irrelevant at your convenience. No one answers. The statement does not want reply. It wants adoption. He turns to go, and then stops, with his hand on the cold lip of the trail. A habit makes him wipe the smear he left on the paint. The cloth comes back grey. The trail remains what it is. He lets the cloth fall and does not scold himself. Before they leave, he gives one instruction the park understands better than his own men do. If they come for this ground again, do not delay them with tidiness. Delay them with distance. The captain relays it without embroidery. The sergeant closes the ammo box with a palm and a click. The private on the tractor climbs down and wipes his hands on his trousers without shame. They file back through the open gate boots, bending the flattened grass in new directions that will be forgotten by evening. Behind them, the piece waits for the next crew who will not admire it. It will accept their hands, accept their hurry, accept their indifference, accept their accuracy measured only to the need of the hour. It will do this again and again until the schedule calls it elsewhere or into a ditch. No oath is required. Only minutes. He does not look back. The tally has been taken. Steele spoke it. Ground signed it. The waste sits where he will carry it, the years invested in a sermon the clock does not hear, the pride polished into surfaces the timetable ignores. He gives it no elegy. He gives it a conversion. He carries the new doctrine like a weight that fits the hand. It is not lighter than the old, it simply balances better. The move to the saddle held not because the position was clever, but because it could be reached and worked within the interval the enemy allowed. Crews settled into a pace that sounded less like parade and more like harvest. Nets up, tubes turned, bearings checked to the standard of enough. He stands where the breeze can reach the sweat and listens to the gun park speak in low syllables of work rather than pride. Acceptance does not arrive as a speech, it arrives as a habit. He watches a loader count by knuckles instead of by flourish. He notes a driver who picks a line for the tow that ruins no seconds. He sees a chief ignore a cosmetic bind on a latch because the latch will outlast this hour, and this hour is what matters. The old self wants to intervene to fix the latch, to polish the dignity back into the metal. The new self, born here under this weather, lets it be. A man who has named his fear can allow the imperfect tool to do the perfect job for which it exists. He shape-tests the thought against every surface. Counter-battery in his lexicon once meant locating, punishing, restoring the moral hierarchy of precision over noise. Now it means making the enemy move his park before his next round, not measuring purity of solution on a board. Artillery preparation once meant carving the air into arguments about fire control. Now it means making bridges and lanes exist as soon as they are needed, and vanish as soon as they are used. Maneuver once meant showing a better geometry. Now it means arriving inside the other man's minute and leaving before he can own the next. The figures he trusts are not abandoned. They are redirected. Range is no longer a number to boast about in a cafe after the war. Range is a lever that moves the enemy's schedule. Weight of shell is not a romance of metal. Weight is how many corrections a wall can absorb before the men behind it begin to write crooked. Rate is not prowess. It is pressure measured in the seconds a hand cannot keep still. Mobility is not elegance. It is the refusal to be present when the enemy's mathematics finally catches up. He drafts a clean sentence he can teach to captains without lying to them. Availability is a weapon, not a circumstance. not a gift, a weapon. He tests the idea by running it backward. A fine instrument unavailable on time is not a weapon, it is inventory. The mouth shapes the word with the same care it once reserved for honorifics. Inventory. The insult is accurate without cruelty. He files it for later use when pride needs a surgeon rather than a poet. The ground itself becomes a diagram. Fold to fold, hedgerow to hedgerow, he sees lanes not as lines of fire, but as lines of arrival. The orchard is a clock face. Impact spacing is the second hand. Redeployment minutes are the hour hand. The perfect position, if it cannot be vacated and remade on schedule, is a trap baited with dignity. The alternate position, if it can be masked and manned inside the enemy's interval, is a better species of courage than standing still. He walks past the mover as it settles, engine ticking down. The mechanic wipes a hose with the back of his wrist, then bangs the clamp into honesty with 2 quick blows. The gesture would once have drawn a reprimand for roughness. Today it earns nothing but trust. He notes the time from clamp to idle to ready. He writes it on the page in his head where maxims live. Not a proverb, a number. When the first answering salvo leaves their own tubes, he does not listen for beauty. He listens for spacing. He watches the crews prepare to lift, even as they fire, because a piece that can leave promptly is worth more than a piece that can sing. He hears the radios share short words that fit between concussions. He hears already the next move in the grammar saddle to ditch, ditch to cops, cops to the next map square that will accept a gun for the length of a cigarette, and no longer. He watches men learn the conjugations of this language faster than their instructors were permitted to teach it in schools. The core fear irrelevance stops being a shadow and becomes a thing he can set on the table and describe. Irrelevance comes when the other side writes the day's tempo. Relevance returns when you seize even one beat of that tempo and keep it long enough to move. The instruments that regain relevance are not necessarily the finest. They are the most obedient to time. He is not ashamed to say this aloud anymore. He is ashamed that he waited. He drafts the balance sheet he will carry forward. Guns to minutes, miles to choices, shells to silences, trucks to hours reclaimed from the enemy. Crews to confidence measured not by parade posture, but by how often the tow line is already taut when the word goes out. The enemy taught him the units. He will keep them. He looks to the horizon and imagines an army rebuilt around this arithmetic. Workshops that prize throughput over ceremony. Training that punishes delay harder than error, caught and corrected in motion. Staff tables that mark every plan not by elegance, but by the count of minutes during which the enemy will be forced to answer rather than to ask. A culture that still respects finish where finish serves time, and discards finish where it steals time. The old oath is not erased. It is rewritten, hold the clock, and the ground will follow. He distills the day into a single metric he can say without raising his voice. Resource to time. Ammunition tubes, fuel crews, roads, prime movers, repair parts, bridging, divided by the minutes they can be made present at the right grid. Not tons alone, not men alone, not courage alone, resource per minute at the point of decision. He states it inwardly, the way a mathematician states a theorem before chalk touches slate. The answer explains every humiliation and every success he has watched since dawn. He calls the captains and gives them the only order that will not age. Keep the guns available. Keep the roads available. Keep the men available. Trade, paint and polish for presents. Spend pride where it buys minutes. Save pride where it does not. He sees them receive it without flinching. They have lived the proof. The wind carries the last cordite away from the saddle. The lamps in the plotting room burn steady. The roof has stopped coughing. The breath returns to a count that can be held without stealing. He does not congratulate himself. He writes 3 lines on the page that has replaced the catechism. Resource. Time decides. Survivability. Rounds. Minute decides relevance. Miles of reach decides who chooses the fight.